Well, good evening, everybody. This is Dr. Josh with Digital Hammurabi. Looks like we have 21 people watching already. Good to be back. We were on this afternoon for a little while to talk a little bit about the HAP scholarship and how we got. We're gonna support 3 people. So that's really fantastic. So thank you all very much. Those of you that donated, those of you that have been here. Participating, kind of cheering us on. It's really all down to you guys. So thank you very, very much. I am going to see, we have somebody from Australia in the side chat. Good to see you, Easy Rider. Hey, Nick J, Uvas, Lisa for Truth, Cadaver Spider. Good to see you all guys here. It's good to be back. Been having some aches this afternoon, so I'm gonna try to. I took some. They were chest pains, which is always a little scary, but hopefully it's just. I don't know. I took some. Anyway, doesn't matter. So we have been going through Exodus 21, and I pulled back up the text. And last week we ended with verse 21, and I thought that maybe we just kind of quickly go back through. Oops, I can't scroll on that screen. I have to scroll on this screen. I thought maybe we'd go quickly back through the chapter, but before we do, I just wanted to talk briefly about why we're even talking about Exodus 21. So maybe I'll take that off the screen until we do. By the way, if you guys have questions or comments, I've got the live chat up here on the screen, so tag me at Digital Hammurabi, and I will try to keep up with it. So, but you know, even though we all get kind of tired, I'm sure, of talking about slavery in the Old Testament, it's a topic that continues to come up, and it's important. Part of the reason that it's important is, I think that in order to really understand the ancient world, we don't want to, see it through our eyes only, right? We don't want to look back at the first millennium BCE and say, okay, well, here's what slavery was like. But it really wasn't like that, because that would be bad. And the Bible only says good things. God is, wholly good. And so we need to make sure that we change it around, think about it differently, so that we can hold them to the same moral standard that we have today. And of course, I think that's problematic. I think that there is a different way, a better way to look at the text, to let it stand on its own, and to let it stand in its ancient Near Eastern context. Also, I just wanted to say there are a lot of people that have accused me, and people like me, of relying too heavily upon the ancient Near Eastern culture, or the ancient Near Eastern literary motifs, the ancient Near Eastern genres. So, no, Lisa for Truth, you're absolutely right. It doesn't mean that it was right, and that's not my argument. I would just say that we want to be careful not to. We don't want to impose our developed morality and our understanding of right and wrong, which I think has developed, in my opinion. Impose it in the same way upon them. There are certain things, obviously, that we don't want to. Anyway, but that's not really, I don't think that's really my overarching point here. My point here is to show you, what does the text say? What conclusions that we draw from that, from a morality standpoint. I'm not a philosopher, so I'm just sort of giving you the little things that I've thought about. But my point here is to try to set aright some of what I consider to be unnecessary misconceptions of some of these things in the biblical text. So I actually have a video that I finished the recording of and editing, and now I just need to kind of put in, you know, some of the, I don't know what you'd call it, you know, some of the text here and there in the video. On Numbers 31, I've heard lately this argument that if you guys are familiar with Numbers chapter 31, you have the Midianites and Moses before he dies and the children of Israel are supposed to go into the land under Joshua. He is told to go and wipe out the Midianites. And the rationale for that is there's this incident in chapter 25 where the children of Israel commit this rebellion against God by worshiping other gods, and they do that with the Midianites, and there's a plague that is sent. And at any rate, what I've heard to sort of soften that chapter, because really what you're talking about is a type of at least partial divine genocide, and the way that God has been justified in that passage is that this is something new. I hadn't heard this before. That the plague that was described in chapter 25 was there because the Midianites were practicing sexual immorality, bestiality, those sorts of things. And so an actual plague had broken out, because of bacteria and infections, and that was spreading. It's even been called biological warfare by some. And anyway, so I've put out a video responding to that, which seemed strange, but it didn't seem like something that I would have to put out a response to, but there you have it. I think it's pretty straightforward. That's going to go up, I think, on our Patreon page in its rough draft form until I get all the editing done. We'll probably try to put that up this weekend. So if you're a member of our Patreon, you'll be able to have access to that, early access to it. But at any rate, the reason we're going through Exodus 21 is it's sort of a hotbed. Exodus 21 and Leviticus 25, Deuteronomy 20 and 21, these are sort of hotbeds for this discussion. And slavery is a big issue. And so because there's so much that's been said about Exodus 21, I thought it would just be a good idea to go kind of verse by verse through it. I have to admit I haven't done an awful lot of specific prep for these two live streams. Just kind of going off the cuff here. Of course, I've studied these passages fairly extensively, but I haven't done any recent prep for it. So forgive me if I have to think a little more than I perhaps normally would. But so quickly, let me pull the window back up. The reason that I have the Hebrew and the English up is, by the way, I don't know if you guys have seen my cool digital Hammurabi mug before. I'm sure that you have, since I drink from it all the time. But sorry, real quick, I see a question. Do you think, Nick J asked, do you think you could do a future response video on AIG's material, electric or physical? Yeah, I think so. We did one, you probably know about it, but we did one joint thing with Polygamy, who I see in the chat. Hey, Polygamy. And we actually respond a little bit to Mr. Ken Ham. So Megan and I were in that one. In case you haven't seen it, I'm sure you have. Okay, so let's sort of walk through. The reason that I have the Hebrew up is there's some things that even if you can't read the Hebrew, there's benefit to looking at it, because there's certain things that you can see structurally in the passage that means something. So one of the things that I pointed out, and I'm going to have to switch over here. One of the things that I pointed out is, not all the time, but often when you see this highlighted word key in Exodus 21, particularly in the legal text, Math Magic Pagan says that I've become quite tech savvy. Well, thank you very much. Megan showed me how to do it. So, but often, almost always, when you see a key, like what is highlighted here in verse 2, that's telling you that this is a new law. And that if you see here in verse 3 an im underneath of it, that two-letter word there that's highlighted, that is a subset. That's a continuation of the law that began with ki. So here, we'll just look at it here. Ki tiknei eved ivri. So if you purchase a Hebrew slave, sheshanim ya'avod, v'shvi'it yetzeh lechofshi chinam. So verse 2, and this is what I'm doing right here. So if you purchase a Hebrew slave, 6 years he will serve. And in the 7th, or maybe but in the 7th, he will go out free, without payment, without any more debt, I suppose is a good way to say that. Sorry, Nick J, we're in Exodus 21. So if you notice then in verse 3, im begapo, yavo begapo, im begapo yavo, begapo yetse. So if, and im, there it is right there. So if by himself he comes in, by himself he will go out. So you can see that that's a subset to this law, right? It's a continuation of this law. So you've got ki here, and then you've got im, and im down here. And that tells you that verses 3, 4, and 5 are all subsets of, or continuations of, I guess might be a good way to say it, of verse of the same law that is stated in verse 2. So what we talked about last week then was if a Hebrew servant comes in and he serves you, so he this is more than likely a debt slave here. I'm fairly convinced of that. There are some people that would debate it, but that's okay. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This passage is difficult. And when it comes to, there are a lot of tricky things in it, but it's difficult when it comes to whether we're talking about a debt slave or a chattel slave, right? It's not straightforward in some places. I think it's pretty clear in some, and this is one of the ones that I would argue it's fairly clear. But if a Hebrew servant is purchased, there are some that would argue, like Van Seters. Van Seters would say, I think it's Van Seters that would say that Hebrew slave was already a Hebrew slave and he's being purchased. It's not terribly relevant, I don't suppose, but it does have some implications. But here, if this Hebrew slave comes in, you're only allowed to make him work for 6 years. He has to go free in the 7th. If he comes in single, then he goes out single. If he comes in married, then his wife goes out with him. However, if he comes in single and his master gives him a wife, ostensibly a slave wife, and they procreate, they have children, when his 6 years are up, he goes out free, but his wife and the children, they belong to the master. And so the slave can make the decision, I love my master, I love my family, I want to stay with them, so I'm going to dedicate myself to my master, olam, right, in perpetuity. And I'm doing a video, by the way, right now. I'm doing 2 videos. I've recorded the first. I'm halfway through the script on the second, where I'm addressing a lot of responses that I've heard. Some of them, I don't know, aren't terribly moving, but there are people that have asked me to sorry, they have asked, I saw something in the side chat. Sorry. I'm really sorry, Math Magic Pagan. I was trying to decipher what he meant, seeing it at a glance. What was I saying? Oh, so some people have asked me, what do you think about these responses to some of these issues? So I felt the need to respond to them. Some of them are simple, I would say. Some of them are a little more complicated, but nonetheless. So, right. So if he decides he's going to serve Olam forever, then the master takes him to the doorpost, to the doorpost, and, runs his ear through with an awl in a ritual, probably tagging him in some way as a slave. This is something that was common in the ancient Near East. And he becomes a servant forever, a slave forever. So, okay, we continue down. Verse 7, we talked about if a man sells his daughter as an amah, as a maidservant, a female slave. The context, I think, makes it pretty clear that we're talking about a daughter that is being sold particularly as a wife or a concubine, as a spouse of some sort of sexual partner. Women, of course, their bodies were valuable for procreation purposes, and so that's just how it was. And so here, the text says clearly that the amah does not go out, is not released, does not go out free, as the evadim do, as the menservant, the male slaves do. But there are other stipulations that protect her. So if the master doesn't like her anymore, finds her to be displeasing. By the way, the word ra there doesn't mean evil or wickedness. It's not some moral, necessarily some moral judgment that's being placed on her. Sorry, blanking on these easy words. This is an idiom. So to find favor in one's eyes and to find displeasure in one's eyes, this is idiomatic expression. So, but if you look up the word ra, right, in a lexicon, that's what it'll say. It'll say, it'll say a bunch of different things, but one of them is evil. So, right now I'm catching things that Math Magic Pagan is saying because his name isn't Blue. I'm seeing it. So anyway, I've considered calling Jesus as Lord something else. Talked to Skylar about it, but I don't know that I feel comfortable doing it. But it was funny. Anyway, right. Sorry. So, right, if the protections that are in place for the amah. So if she's no longer pleasing to him, he can't just sell her to a foreign people, which again would have been not uncommon practice, the selling of slaves in the ancient Near East, of course. And so there are these stipulations that are in place. You can't just sell her because you've dealt faithlessly with her. And if you designate her to your son, you have to treat her like a daughter, as according to the practices or the customs of a daughter. You also have to keep up some basic essentials for her. Otherwise, if you don't, you have to let her go. You have to allow her to be redeemed. So then we have some other laws here. So the one who strikes a man, we talked about that. If you strike somebody, if you lie in wait, if you don't lie in wait, or if you do it intentionally, or second degree, a manslaughter or first degree murder, that sort of thing. I have a question here from Nick J. In my physical copy of the Hebrew of the Torah, certain sentences end and start with a mem or pei. Why is that? Yeah, we can talk about that. These are part of the Masoretic tradition. Oh gosh. Trying to So petach, sorry, I'm looking at my, I don't know if you guys can, I always ask you that, can you hear Oliver? Yeah, we'll talk about that. Actually, might not be a bad idea to just kind of go through the Masoretic text. For those of you that are, that can read Hebrew or that are studying Hebrew, that might not be a bad idea to sort of walk through the Masoretic texts. I think that would be useful, because then you can, yeah, oh, you do hear the baby, okay. Yeah, that's Oliver. He took a nice long nap today, so he might not want to go down. So here, we're in verse 16. So the one who steals a man, so, you know, laws against theft here. You can't just steal somebody. If you do, whether you're caught with them or, you know, whatever the death penalty is in place, you curse your mother and father, you die. Then you get down to 18. I'm just kind of going quickly back through this stuff so that we kind of see where we are. If what happens if two men are fighting and one hits the other, he's got to pay his medical bills. If he's just injured for a time and then he gets back up. And then of course we ended up with verses 20 and 21, where, you know, it talks about one of our big cruxes in Exodus 21. So I'll just go back through it very quickly. So v'chi yakeh ish et avdo o et amato bashevet umet tachat yado nakom yanakem. So and if, so new law, key, if you can see that right there. So new law here. And if a man strikes his servant, hits his servant, been an awful lot. If you watch some of these videos, you'll hear people talk, or people talk a lot about the word nakah here. You know, let me just, I've said this in other videos, but I feel like this is important. Look, there are some basic, oh, hi, Christine Blackfeather, how are you? There are some basic hermeneutical principles that you learn. I really don't mean this in a condescending way. I mean this in a, like, it would be worth everybody's time. If I'm thinking about one person or many people, it's worth everybody's time to do a little research and to look at what are common mistakes when interpreting the biblical text. What are, and not just the biblical text, just ancient texts. What are some common hermeneutical mistakes, right? Ways that hermeneutics, what is the way that you interpret the text? And one of them is, and I've talked about this in a video, but I'll just say it again. One of them is saying, well, this word is used in this passage, and it's used over here in this other passage. In this passage, it means this. That means it must mean this in this passage. Right? That's not how words work. Right? I use the example of my nose is running, the refrigerator is running, and that Olympic race or Olympic sprinter is running. Right? They mean very different things. It just depends on the context. And you can't say my nose is running and the refrigerator running. They must mean the same thing because it's the same word. Right? That's not how this works. So, you know, just because the word nakah is used several places in this passage, doesn't mean that you can import. This is another problem. It doesn't mean that it necessarily means the same thing. Thank you, Yami Yamizuki. It's true. And I'm going to say another comment about that just in a second, but just so I can finish this thought. You can't import the meaning of that particular lexeme necessarily. You have to have justifiable reasons for doing so. It has to mean that in the particular context that you're looking at it in. But you can't then import, another thing you can't do is import the context, all of the context, right? So, you know, if you, I don't know, if you have that, I'm going to go for a run this morning, and I'm clearly not an Olympic sprinter. I'm going to go for a run this morning. And then I say, you know, look, that Olympic sprinter is running. You know, I might be able to say that the basic, you know, aspects of of what we're doing. You know, I'm going to close this door. Excuse me for just a second. I don't know how much that'll help, but poor guy. You know, you might be able to say, yes, we're not talking about nose running. We're not talking about refrigerator running or car engine running. We're talking about a person running. But you can't then say, well, that Olympic sprinter, look, he's running really, really fast. That must mean that Josh was sprinting through the neighborhood on his run this morning. No, you can't import the context either. Right now, if you know, and these are basic things, right? The reason that I bring this up about sort of these fundamental aspects of hermeneutics is, number one, we're going through a passage, right? We're going through a text in some detail, and it's important to remember those things. But secondly, some of the people that I interact with, I really think that they are very intelligent people. I really do. And you know, sometimes I get frustrated by some people. And I'm not just thinking of that one person. There are lots of people that I interact with that I get frustrated by. But, you know, many, if not most of them, are very intelligent people. And you can tell that they think things through, but they're not equipped. They're not equipped with some of the things that some of the, I don't know, the different means of, for example, handling ancient text in a responsible way, in an effective way. It's difficult, right? This isn't easy stuff to do. And if it were, people could, you know, go to seminary for a couple of days and then be good to go, or grab some apps, you know, off their phone and do it. But you know, the reality here is that this takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of dedication. And look, I'm not the smartest guy on the block, right? I have no great brilliance or something. I've just spent a lot of time doing this stuff, and I've worked very hard at it. Many sleepless nights, you know, reading through ancient texts in many different languages. So, and again, that doesn't have anything to do with some natural brilliance that I have. I am not a genius in any way. I've just had to work really, really hard to do this, and I still have to work really hard to do it. I mean, it's something that can go very quickly. So, anyway, I say this almost as an encouragement. You know, if you're listening to this and you say, maybe my hermeneutics aren't as up to snuff as they should be, take heart. You know, if you want to, message me privately or message another scholar that you respect and say, hey, you know, can you give me some tips? You know, review what I'm saying. What do you think about it? You know, somebody that you trust. And that's really the only way we get ahead and progress in this stuff. So anyway, okay, enough of all that. So verse 20, we haven't even started yet, and I'm a half hour in. I'm really sorry, guys. Miss Jessa, good to know. It means I have hope. Indeed. We all do. So verse 20, if a man hits his servant or his male servant or his male slave, female slave with a rod, and he dies under his hand, he will surely, in fact, whatever, indeed be avenged. And lots of different interpretations on that. I think we're restricted to a couple. Some are more, I think, realistic than others. My particular take on this is that we're talking about a debt slave. I think we've got good parallels in the Laws of Hammurabi for this particular situation. And I think that this is one of the things that you can see, and you'll see this in one of the videos I'm getting ready to put out probably in a week, is you'll see that beating a slave as a form of punishment, as a form of discipline, as a it was expected, right? It was a common thing. I was reading through Michael Fox's commentary on the book of Proverbs, and he has a long section in there about because there are a lot of proverbs about beating children. There's some about beating slaves, and it's at least the discipline of slaves. And, this is expected practice, I guess would be a good way to say it. So here, I think that's what we're looking at. I think we're talking about a master that beats his servant with a rod, which is, again, the shavet is the thing that is the staff that is used. Is the staff that is used to punish children. Somebody made the argument, I don't mean to chuckle, but somebody made the argument that all the time, I guess, the times that in the Proverbs that the staff is used, this is another one of these circumstances where you have, I'll finish a thought. I love MS. But when the staff is used, that it's metaphorical, right? So when it talks about he that spares the rod, in punishment of his child is, spoiling the child, right? And the reason that must be metaphorical is that you have other passages, in the prophets, this apocalyptic literature talks about the staff and the Psalms, and so this must be metaphorical because there are circumstances that one could find in the Old Testament text where a staff is being used as a metaphor. Well, again, just because it's used as a metaphor here doesn't mean that it's a metaphor here. Is it Proverbs 29? I can't remember which one, but it says, I gotta look it up. But it says the whip for the donkey, the bridle for the horse, and the shavet for the fool's back. Right? Proverbs is Proverbs 23. I get these mixed up because Proverbs aren't exactly easy for me anyway, to remember individual Proverbs. I think it's Proverbs 23 where it says, if you beat a child with a rod, he will not die. Right? I mean, why say he won't die if you're beating him with something that's metaphorical? I mean, what's the metaphor there? I mean, I just think that, you could maybe try to get some sort of metaphorical, meaning out of that, but I don't think, thank you, Vlad. Yep. Whip for the horse. Yep. Good. I don't know why that would necessitate. Anyway, so here, it's clear that we have a not a metaphorical rod being used, and if the master beats the slave and the slave dies, I think we have good reason to say here that this is a master that has gone too far, that is beating the slave, particularly because of the statement in that proverb, you beat with a rod, they will not die. Well, the anticipation then is that if you're beating with a rod, you're not going to kill them if it's a form of punishment. So then if they die immediately under their hand, I think that, that's what you're talking about here. You're talking about a master that goes too far, and it's clear that it's not punishment, that this is taking it too far. However, if the slave does not die, this is where it gets a little more debated. And you have at least 3 different ways that you can view this last part here. But if the slave doesn't die, it's clear that the master isn't to be punished, but why? And so you can see it there in the second part of the verse. So, ki chaspohu, so he is his money because he is his money. Couple different ways you can take this. You can take it the way that most scholars take it, and that would be that this is his, he owns him, he owns the slave. And so if he doesn't die, it's because, there is no punishment. Or, if he doesn't die immediately, it's not clear whether he dies after a day or two or he gets back up after a day or two. Nonetheless, in either case, if there is a period of time where the death doesn't come immediately, then, what we're looking at here is no punishment because of this last phrase, right? So he is his silver, he is his money, so the master owns him. It could be, Harry Hoffner has tied this back to a couple verses earlier where it's talking about men that are fighting and one hits the other and the one has to pay the medical bills. That's, perfectly reasonable. That the master, what the master is out is the medical bills that he has to pay. That's fine. They would translate that. The penalty is his fee, his kesef, his fee. That's fine. I mean, there are a couple different ways this can be taken, but none that substantially change the thrust of the passage. So, anyway, if you guys have questions or comments, please tag me at Digital Hammurabi, then I can see them. But let's move on. Here we finally made it to verse 22 where we left off. So, and I'll leave the. There's not a lot of reason for me to leave the Hebrew up at this point, but I don't know, why not? Just so you can see it there. So ki, if, right? Yunatsu, anashim. So, and if men are, struggling with each other and they strike a pregnant woman, that, or and, whatever, however you want to take that, her child, the fetus is the word I'm shooting for here, goes out. But there is no ason, and this is tough. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's not really a slavery passage, but it's good to talk about briefly. Ason is tough. Here, how do they take it? There's no fatality. It's difficult, right? The Septuagint has an interesting reading here. We won't go into that kind of depth, but nonetheless, anyway, the punishment. Sorry, I feel like we can move a little bit more quickly because actually we'll get bogged down in this if I don't. So this is where two men are struggling and you have them hitting, probably accidentally here, a woman, and she miscarries. If you look in the Laws of Hammurabi, it's in the 200s, you'll see something very, very similar to this, right? So, and it's talking about the fetus dying, right? The fetus, there's a miscarriage, the fetus dies. I think that's probably what we're talking about here. It's somewhat ambiguous. It's difficult to get at. But I think what we're looking at is the fetus goes out in a miscarriage, the fetus dies, but the woman is not hurt. Then there's a punishment that's set in place, whatever the husband of the wife deems fit and the judges allow for, right? So we're talking about something that's less than death, right? This isn't lex talionis, at least in this idea of life for life, right? Because ostensibly the fetus was not considered on the same level as a human individual. But and again, I say that, and I know that could open up a can of worms. I'm not trying to do that with these verses, but just to go through it. But if there is ason, if there is fatality, if there is damage, if there is then you will give nefesh tachat nefesh, you'll give life for life. And then, of course, you have your big lex talionis passage here. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Oh, boy, I won't remember these. Keviyah, tachat keviyah. So, I don't remember what the difference is. A petza is like a wound. I think keviyah might be a burn or a scar. Chabura is that a burn? So, wound, burn. Anyway, I can look. Burn for burn, wound for bruise for bruise. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So, 26. Another important law. So, v'chiyakeh ish et ein avdo o et ein amato. So, and if, again, beginning of the law, if a man strikes the eye of his male servant, male slave, male servant, whatever, or the eye of his female slave, and destroys it, he must send him out free. The chofshi, same thing that we saw above, on account of his eye, right? So this and the following verse are describing permanent damage that is done to the slave. So, and if you look here, so this is a sub to continuation of the previous law. By the way, I feel like I'm keeping an eye on the side chat, at least for the little yellow or red or whatever color it'll be highlight. So if you guys have questions, let me just scroll back through and make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, Trevor asked me a question. Sorry. Do the Exodus slave laws prescribe or regulate polygamy with a slave or their use as a concubine? Yeah, I mean, so I think that there in the beginning of 21, where it's talking about taking, verse 7, I guess is where it was at, where it talks about a man selling his ama, his daughter as an ama. Yeah, it didn't necessitate that this was for a wife, because if you look, he takes another wife. Very likely this is also allowing for concubinage. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it's doing. So it's a good question. Okay, so sub law here in 27, and same principle except with a tooth. So if you knock out the tooth of a male slave or a female slave, and you destroy it, no, you don't destroy it. It falls out. Yapil. You cause it to fall. You cause it to go out. Then you set him free on account of his tooth. So again, the difference here, if we're looking at it in context, is that you have, this is the way that I see this, right? And again, there's some variation here. I think the majority of scholarship is going to go with what I'm getting ready to say. If you beat a slave with a shavit and there's no death, it's understood that this was part of, the normal punishment of a slave, and again, which is something that we see in Proverbs. This idea of disciplining a slave physically, and so that being the case, not even that being the case. I mean, this is what the text, I think, says pretty clearly. If the slave dies immediately, it's indication that you weren't just punishing it, you were taking it too far. If not, a little bit of variation on how you can translate there or understand that, but I understand that. I interpret that as you're out when you're out, right? The master's out when he's out, because that the time that he's down, the time that he's out, or the fact that he died, either one, it was your money, right? That was your slave, so that's your loss. Again, different ways that you can look at that, but here, I think what we're talking about here is permanent damage, right? So tooth goes out and eye goes out. This is, you're permanently crippling the individual. There probably some implications here to also to the perhaps to the severity that would bring about such a result. Striking in the face is, I think, clearly implied. Hard enough to knock out a tooth, to destroy an eye. This is a big thing here. So, Trevor, we could probably talk maybe in a separate stream a little bit about that a little bit more. But that's good. I mean, it's a tough topic, right? Miss Jessa, what is the Hebrew word for abomination? You have toeva, but I'd probably have to look at which verse you're talking about specifically to see. There might be a synonym for it. but toeva is the one that I'm familiar with. Yeah, oh, you guys can hear him. Yeah, he's poor little guy. Megan just went and picked him up, I think. He's not sleeping. Okay, now we move in verse 28 on to the issue of the goring bull. And it's one of Oliver's toys. It's extraordinarily loud. So if a bull gores a man or a woman and he dies, it will surely be stoned. The bull will surely be stoned. It will not be its flesh will not be eaten. But the master, the owner of the bull, is naki, is innocent. So I'm just so you know, I'm here. But again, you see here ki, right? I might have to go move those toys. They tend to take a long time to turn off. But here we have im, right? So and we have im here. I have to look at this. Yep, this is a continuation of the previous verse, so it doesn't have a ki or an im, and then you have another im here. So you know these ims, that one, and that one. I'm leaving this up because it's indicating that these are sub parts to this overarching principle, right? These are variations in the law. Sorry, Miss Jessa, I was thinking Killahawk one's question about homosexuality and shrimps. I don't know that I saw that. Sorry. I mean, the word abomination is used in Leviticus 18. Maybe that's what that's what he's referring to. We can take a look at that in a few minutes if you remind me. That's a good question. Okay, so the major principle here, if a bull gores a man or a woman, and this is a free man, a free woman, right? No, it's just ish and isha. This is not, no understanding of this being a slave or a foreigner, or, this is just a regular man or woman. So then you have subsections. Now, but if the bull is a gorer, and he's routinely so this mitmol should show him like previously he's been known to gore, and his master or its master was warned but did not shamar it. For those of you that have taken Hebrew grammar classes, like in seminary or something, shamar is I don't know why, but shamar is used in so many of these grammars as our standard paradigm. So you learn shamarti, shamarta, shamar, shamar, shamara, shamarnu, shamartem. Anyway, so anytime I see shamar, I think, oh gosh, it's not like it's a crazy popular verb, but it's because it's strong. Anyway, okay, sorry, that was quite an aside. But did not guard it, right? Didn't pen it, I guess is the idea, and it kills the man or the woman. The bull kills the man or the woman. It will be stoned, and also its master will be put to death, right? Will die. Sorry, I'm down here. So subsection, the next subsection, the next sublaw. If there's a ransom is set upon him, and he can give like a payment for his life, according to all which is set upon him, he will give, right? So he will give as its ransom all that is set upon him. So the idea here is that the death penalty is required. So, okay, just to put it on perspective so we can stay tracking with this. A guy's got a bull. The bull goes out and gores somebody. Well, it's the first offense, right? You got to stone the bull. Bull's dead, but the owner, I don't die as the owner, because hey, I mean, we're in close proximity to these animals, right? So if the bull gores you, it's like, man, sorry. However, if that bull has tried to gore people before or has gored people before, and it's been told to me, hey, your bull is a gorer, which is a weird word, and I go, oh, cool, thanks, and I don't do anything, now there's a problem, right? So then if that bull goes out and gores a guy, not only is the bull stoned, but I'm stoned as well. Now, so the death penalty, right? This is lex talionis, right? If the free man or the free woman is killed by my bull, I die, right? Lex talionis, life for life. However, or if, so this verse 30, if it's if the person is given the option, right, of paying his way out, the husband, says, or the family, whatever, says, okay, you know what? You don't have to die. We're gonna levy this payment against you. You've got to pay, X amount of dollars. Then it's based on, what is set upon that person. He has to pay all of it. So the death penalty is what's assumed, right? But that he can ransom his way out is the point. And then verse 31, Oven yigach, Ovat yigach. So, and if, it's not no and there, or a son is gored, if it gores a son or a daughter, according to this judgment, according to this custom, it will be done to him. So in the same way that a free man, the penalty is the same if you kill a free man, a free woman, a free son, a free daughter, right? Son, daughter, same penalty, same custom. Im, 32, and I think this is important. Im eved yigach, so if, im eved yigach hashor, o ama, so if the bull gores a male slave or a female slave, kesef 30 shkalim yitain. 30 shekels of silver will be given. So, and it will be given ladonai, v'hashori sakel. So, so it'll be given to it's the slave or the male slave or the female slave's owner, and to its lord, and the bull will be stoned. So a fixed price is set if it is a slave. So, you see here that death penalty required if a free man or a free woman or a son or a daughter, death penalty is required, or it's lex talionis here. However, the victim or the surviving victim, I suppose, can set a ransom price. I guess this is what you'd call it. And the person that owned the bull can pay their way out, but it has to be set and according to all that is levied against him, right? All that is required. And however, if it's a slave, male slave, female slave, it's a fixed price, 30 shekels of silver. So, okay. I think we're probably going to stop there because now we're just talking more about bulls. And yeah, not really dealing. I don't think we're dealing with servants at all. Okay. So before we move on, we've been going about an hour. I was thinking maybe I'd just finish up Exodus 21, but I thought if I was feeling all right, maybe I'd go to Leviticus 25. But before I move on, I don't think I'll do that. What questions do you have? Nick J asks, Walton recently came out with a book on the Torah, and in it he claims that scholars have come to the conclusion the Code of Hammurabi is not a code, but a general set of wisdom. yeah, we can talk about that for a minute. So probably some good resources to look into. If you look at the video from last week, I have some general Near Eastern law, general Near Eastern law books. Actually, we've moved our setup, for those of you that weren't with us in the stream earlier, we've moved our setup into our library, into our study. So if you see me on Skylar's show, after this you'll probably see a bookcase. Yeah, off this way. Hang on a second, I'll go get that book so you can see it. As long as I can find it on the shelf. Come back here. All right. Actually, I'll take this away for just a second. So, right. Everyday Law in Biblical Israel. This is by Raymond Westbrook and Bruce Wells. Yeah, Bruce Wells. And, so the chapters here, sources, litigation, status, and family. So under sources, he's going to talk almost assuredly about, I don't remember specifically in that book, but almost assuredly he'll talk about the Law of Hammurabi. Introduction to Biblical Law by William Morrow. So thinking about biblical law, I suspect somewhere in here, we'll talk a little bit about it. These are good sources for biblical law. Now, if you're looking specifically for the Law Code of Hammurabi, yes, definitely I would not call it a code, even though I just did. The Laws of Hammurabi, you can read about them in a really good article by, oh boy, can't I remember his name? Let's see the book there. That's just terrible. It doesn't matter. Man, why can't I remember his name? I can't remember anything anymore. I'll get it. But there's a chapter in his book. Botero is his name. And Botero has a chapter on what is the Law of Hammurabi. You know what? You guys aren't asking for all that. Let me just say what scholars have concluded. These are legal cases that were adjudicated at the time, right, during the period. So this is certainly not, at least many of them were. This is not a code proper, right? Nobody would, ostensibly, this wasn't something that people said, hey, we've got a case here. Let's go before the Stele and figure out, let's find our case, right? That's not how that thing was used. There is some idea, right? There's some information that it was referenced, but generally speaking, those legal, at least before the first millennium, those legal collections were not. And look, I'm no law expert, ancient Near Eastern law expert. I've read a fair amount about it, but maybe we'll get somebody on that specializes in ancient Near Eastern legal texts, but. These are legal texts that Hammurabi, for example, you can read about it in the prologue and in the epilogue why he's putting those texts there, right? Or that text together. It's there to show that he is the pious, just ruler that takes care of his people, right, on behalf of the gods, and so he's the good and just ruler, and so he's showing these legal cases. So no, the idea of it being a code that was supposed to be all-encompassing, something that was designed to be, something that one could refer to. The laws are, in many cases, far, far, far too specific to be of any use in that way. So, I would say, how did you word that? that he argued not a code, but a general set of wisdom. I wouldn't call it wisdom necessarily. Wouldn't call it wisdom because I feel like that has its own genre. I would say that it is showing the king to be just, right? He's a just king. And these are actual legal cases that that were from the period. We have some of the, and Botero talks about this in his article or in his book chapter, Writing, Reasoning, and the Gods. That's the name of the book. Can't believe I couldn't think of it until just now. But he talks about that, how we actually have some of the laws, you can actually see them in actual cases that we have. So, hope I answered that. I feel like I just rambled on a bit though, sorry. Trevor Lunn, when you moved the set, did you have to disassemble the background wall brick by brick and rebuild it? Yes, we did, as it turns out. Thank you for asking. Kilowhawk 1, would you consider Moses and his laws a con and guilty of nepotism when he made his brother and head priest and made laws requiring giving him money and said that it was giving to God? Interesting question. I think that assumes certain things about the historicity of these accounts that these texts are doing something, in my opinion, and in many scholars' opinions. So showing the traditions and the validity of those traditions requires antiquity, and but we can talk about that in another stream. I think it's probably I see what you're saying. I definitely see what you're saying. It's probably missing the point a little because I don't think that these are, this is a historical account, right? I don't think this is that these events took place. Christina Blackfeather says it's old farming laws. Yeah, there definitely are. Yeah, interestingly enough, I don't know that I must not have read it to you guys in the book club. There's something called the Farmer's Instructions in Sumerian, and Miguel Seville edited it, and it's a great, I say great, I mean, you guys might not think it's great, but it's farming instructions from a son to his father. And it's actually really cool that we have it. Anyway, I don't know why you said farming laws. That's why I thought of that. Sorry. Okay, MJT532. Digital Hammurabi and other religious texts, did they speak on behalf of their gods like in the Old Testament? Like the Lord said to me. Yeah, there are definitely many ancient Near Eastern prophecies. You have a lot from the first millennium. And maybe, I was going to do a video on that at some point. I don't know that it happened. I'm trying to remember why it didn't happen. Yep, I don't remember. But yes, it's nuanced, I think, in the Old Testament text. But you definitely have prophets that speak on behalf of a deity. Christina Blackfeather, medieval England has a lot of similar laws for farming and slaves. Yeah, I'll bet. Okay, so why don't we go to Leviticus 25, because I feel like I'm kind of caught up on the comments and questions. Again, if you have them, please put them in there, tag me. We have 46 watching now. So I'll go a little bit longer, and we'll do some of Leviticus 25. This is the other fun passage. Sorry, Trevor asks, what is the gap in time from the estimate of the date for the Exodus codifications and the oldest extant texts? I mean, I would say probably the Covenant Code. I mean, it really depends on who you ask. Let's say the traditions are in the early part of the first millennium. Probably not written down till closer to the middle of the first millennium. I think that's being probably a little generous, but that's, that depends on who you ask. So, earliest manuscripts that we have for this stuff would be, from Qumran. So roughly late 3rd into the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE. So, not a huge gap, I wouldn't say, at least from the written standpoint. But Kilowhawk 1, we can agree there is no evidence of the accounts of Exodus. How did the Egyptians feel about being portrayed as such a villain and believed to be true by so many cultures? Yeah, I don't know. Probably not very good. And I think you can say the same thing, probably more so, about the Canaanite tribes that are depicted, as inhabiting the land. So yeah, it's I wouldn't want to be portrayed that way. That's for sure. Okay, so let's go to Leviticus. 25. And I will hit this button here. Boom. Did that work? Oops. It did. Okay. So, Leviticus. I don't want to go into too much detail about transmissional history and stuff because I don't know that it bears an awful lot. There are people that debate whether the majority view, I think, is that Exodus was written first, then Deuteronomy, and then Leviticus, the Holiness Code, which is where we are here in Leviticus 25. Others would say, like Van Cedars, that I think that he would say Leviticus comes first, then Deuteronomy, and then the Covenant Code is last. I don't know that for our purposes it matters a great deal. But here, one of the things that I think is important is that you have a development. I think it's probably a development, whether it goes one way or the other. Here in chapter 25. Okay, so if you remember from Exodus 21, what we just did, and you see this also in Deuteronomy 15, you have Hebrew slaves that are called eveds, right? And they're allowed to serve for 6 years, but then they can go free. But if they have their ear pierced, then they serve forever. I see there's a couple of questions. I'll answer them in just a second. I'm going to finish this thought just so I don't lose it, because I will. However, damn it, I lost it in saying I'm going to finish this so I don't lose it. In Leviticus 25, you see that 7-year release has gone by the wayside, in a sense, or it's being replaced with this year of Jubilee. Right, so the debt forgiveness comes in the 50th year, the year of Jubilee. And so that's one development. The other development is there's a very clear distinction that is being drawn between Hebrew slaves and foreign slaves. And it's for that purpose that we end up in Leviticus 25 an awful lot. And we'll talk about that here momentarily. But let me look at these questions. Trevor Lunn, so getting on for several hundred years for transcription errors then. Yahweh should have learned to scratching clay tablets. It's a fair point. Wouldn't that be nice if we had cuneiform representations of the biblical text? Yeah. Tim Smith, do you believe the JDPI hypothesis is accurate? I suppose it depends on what you mean. If you mean that one specifically, as opposed to, if you're talking about source criticism rather than like redaction or revisionist theories, yeah, maybe. I think it takes, in order for me to formulate a really good opinion on which form of editorial process took place, or a combination of them all, as I think, oh God, I've forgotten his name now. Oh well, would argue for that's probably where I would come down. There's probably some major sources. There's certainly layering that's done. I suspect that some of the sources are put together in a way. Anyway, if you're asking in general, do I believe JDP as opposed to something like Mosaic authorship, if you're using it in a general sense, then yes. I don't believe that Moses wrote the Pentateuch. So, but I don't remember. Or I don't know which one you were asking, so hopefully that answered that. Good question, though, Tim. Thank you. All right, let's scroll down. And so if you look, we can just look over the English. That's fine. Talks about possessions and actually, you know what? It's probably just better to get the context here. So actually, to do that, you know what? I'm going to bring up the NIV. So so that we don't get seasick. Guess you wouldn't get motion sickness, but let me just hide that while I find it. I'm going to pull up Leviticus 25 NIV. Okay. Here we go. Let's see if that worked. Boom. Okay. So, the Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land that I'm going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather the crops. But in the 7th year the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest. A Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your male and female servants, and the hired worker and temporary resident who live among you, as well as for the livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7th Sabbath, boy, that's a mouthful, years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere in the 10th year of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family property and to your own clan." So that's sort of going to set the theme here for what we're looking at. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim... Did I already read that? Yes, I did. Sorry. Verse 11, "The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the untended vines. For it is a jubilee and is to be holy to you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. In this year of jubilee, everyone is to return to their own property. If you sell land to any of your own people or buy land from them, do not take advantage of each other." I know we're reading a lot here, but I think it's good to sort of put this in context. Do not take advantage of each other. You are to buy from your own people on the basis of the number of years since the Jubilee, and they are to sell to you on the basis of the number of years left for harvesting crops. When the years are many, you are to increase the price, and when the years are few, you are to decrease the price, because what is really being sold to you is the number of crops, if that makes sense. So if you're close to the Jubilee, you know that you're only getting a certain number of crops. If you're further from the Jubilee, you're getting more crops, right? So, okay. Do not take advantage of one another, but fear your God. I am the Lord your God. Follow my decrees and be careful to obey my laws, and you will live safely in the land. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and live there in safety. By the way, this is an idea that's going to be developed in chapter 26 ad nauseum. Blessings for doing what is right and following the Lord and giving the land its rest. And then curses if you don't. And of course, you probably know what Israel did in the text. So, okay. So, then the land will yield. Right. Okay. I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the old crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers. Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. So that you're going to see this develop here. There's this concept that, as has been talked about many times before, Israel is allotted land. I lost what I was saying. Sorry. The tribes have been allotted land. Of course, the Levites don't get land, but nonetheless, as you see in Ezekiel, even though they don't get land, the Lord is their land. So because they get the priesthood. Anyway, nonetheless, I'm trying to remember why I was talking about that. Yeah. So each tribe, each family, each clan, is allotted a certain portion of land. So what will happen, you're going to see it here, is that people will become poor, and they go through, poverty in successive stages. And at each stage, the people in the nation are to protect as much as possible their brothers, right? So that they don't go into poverty unless it is absolutely necessary, and then they're to do whatever they can to, mitigate those circumstances. So that's where we're going with that. So the land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine. You reside in the land as foreigners, strangers. Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. You have to allow the land to be bought back by its original owners, because I want there to be equality. God says, I want there to be, in the long run, ultimately, there shouldn't be this big imbalance between the rich and the poor, right? Ideally, there wouldn't be any poor. Now, the text says that there's always going to be poor, but it's because the ideal won't be seen. So, verse 25, if one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, so stage 1, right? They become poor. This happens all the time. And they have to sell some of their property. Their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. Of course, the point is to keep it in the family as much as possible, right? If, however, there is no one to redeem it for them, but later on they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, they are to determine the value for the year since they sold it and refund the balance to the one to whom they sold it. So, 2 stipulations that are being placed in there to protect both parties. One is he's got the right, the guy that sold it has the right to buy it back whenever he gets the financial means to do so. And the guy can't charge some exorbitant price. He has to let him redeem it. But he has to redeem it fairly. So he has to say, all right, what is it actually worth? And there's a set way to do that here. How many years until it will be redeemed anyway. So, okay. But if they do not acquire the means to repay, verse 28, what was sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee. And it will be returned in the Jubilee, and they can then go back to their property. So the word property here, we're going to take a look at it in a minute, but just so you can kind of see it. Anyone who sells a house in a walled city retains the right of redemption a full year after its sale. So slightly different thing here if it's in a walled city. During that time, the seller may redeem it. So if I get poor and I sell a house that's in a walled city, I've got a year to redeem it. I got a year to make up and to redeem it. Verse 30, if it is not redeemed before a full year has passed, the house in the walled city shall belong permanently to the buyer and the buyer's descendants. It is not to be returned in the Jubilee, so we have an exception. But houses and villages without walls around them are to be considered as belonging to the open country. They can be redeemed, and they are to be returned in the Jubilee. Okay. So, sorry if this is tedious. I promise I'm going somewhere with it. Verse 32, the Levites always have the right to redeem their houses in the Levitical towns, which they possess. So the property of the Levites is redeemable. That is, a house sold in any town they hold, and is to be returned in the Jubilee. So another exception. Because the houses in the towns of the Levites are their property among the Israelites. but the pasture land belonging to their towns must not be sold. It is their permanent possession. Okay. So that was phase 1. If somebody becomes so poor, they have to sell them. They have to sell some land, some property. Stage 2. If any of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and are unable to support themselves among you. So now we've got somebody that doesn't really have anything else to sell, and so they can't support themselves. Help them as you would a foreigner, a ger. Oh, I have to look actually at what the word is here. A foreigner and a stranger, because foreigner takes on many different forms. No wordplay intended there. So they can continue to live among you. Do not take interest or any profit from them, but fear your God, so that they may continue to live among you. So you can hear the mitigating circumstance. You see the mitigating circumstance here and the way that it's trying to keep them from falling further and further into debt. You must not lend them money at interest or sell them food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. So, don't take advantage of them. Now, verse 39. And this is where I should switch over. Let me do that. How do I do that? I do it like this. Boom. And I will scroll down to 39. Actually, while I'm doing it, can you guys see that? Let me see. Yeah, you can. Good. Just looking here for this word. Yeah, okay. This word here, achuzah. This word here, achuzah. I know it's in a slightly different form because it's in the construct, but you know what? If you knew what the construct was, you probably didn't need me to explain that to you, so I apologize. Achuzah there, so you can see it here. Their possession, their inheritance. This is that landed property that is being described here. They need to go back to their inheritance. Go back to their landed property. Here it is here, achuzah. Sorry, I'm just looking for it in different places. Where am I? Verse 30. Right. Here it is here. Achuzah, are achuzat. Achuzatam. Here it is again. Achuzah. So this is this word is used all over the place in chapter 25, right? This is the land, their possession. This is what's been allotted to them, right? This is their landed property. Okay. So now, we come down to verse 39. Right here. So, okay. So, if your brother who is with you becomes poor and either sells himself or is sold to you, you will not make him work the work of a slave, right? So you can see already the distinction that's being made here in Exodus 21, Deuteronomy 15. You know, if somebody becomes a debt slave, that's what they're called. They're called an eved, right? And that's what they're made to do. They do it for 6 years and then they go free. Here we have a slight change, and it's not really that slight actually. So, like a sahir, this is like a hireling, a hired worker, and then it's coupled with this word toshav. It'll come back here in a minute. Like a hired worker, we're going to call this a sojourner for now, but it's debated what this word toshav actually means. It's not terribly relevant at the moment, but anyway, like a hired worker and like a sojourner, he will be with you until the year of Jubilee. He will work with you. Now, what does that mean? So a sahir, if you go through and look, and we won't do like some advanced study on this word or whatever right now, but a sahir is a hireling, right? And a toshav, I'll give you what I think probably it is. Although, again, nailing it down is difficult to do. There's an article that was written within the past 15 years, I think. My Might even be more recent than that. But it's I think it was the last 15, 20 years. Anyways, excuse me. I could be wrong on that, but it's relatively recent for biblical studies. What is the Toshav? Like, who was he? And the conclusion there, I think, is that I think what they concluded was that so a Sachir is somebody that's paid, right? It's a hired worker. It's somebody that you come and you hire them for a period of time and they do work, right? A Toshav, the way that one of the ways that this word is seen, one of the ways that it's used, is that you have someone who's a foreigner who's residing in the land. They're not a ger, right? They're not a resident alien. At least not necessarily. There's some... I'll just say this. The ger, it's a tough category. These foreigners, the way that you distinguish foreigners in the biblical text is tough. It's not easy. So a toshav might be a subset of ger, might be a subset of the resident alien, but this is probably somebody, or there's good evidence at least for this being somebody that if I own land as an Israelite, I can rent that land to a foreigner to till it, right? To grow on it. And so it's like a tenant farmer. That's what it is. I'd say that's probably a good way to say it, a tenant farmer. And so that person pays you, a set rent to utilize that field, but then they keep, whatever additional produce that they glean or that they get from it. So at any rate, what they say here is that you're to treat this person either as a hired worker, someone that's not a tenant farmer, or a sojourner, which may be a tenant farmer, who is with you. In other words, it's not a slave, right? There's a distinction that's being made here. You don't treat this debt slave as an eved. You treat them as a hired worker or as a toshav. How do they translate here, actually, here? An employee or a hired resident. Yeah, I think that's fair. Whatever it is, the point is that it's a more elevated position than a slave, right? Okay. And you do that until the year of Jubilee. So, and he shall go out from you, he and his sons or his children with him, to return to, sorry, I'm right here, to his family and to his achuzah, his landed property. To the landed property of his fathers. So this is the point of the text. You have somebody. This is probably a situation where you have like a paterfamilias, right? You've got a guy that he's probably passed through these stages, right? He's probably passed through these stages that we've seen in the text here, where he's had to sell his property and then he couldn't make enough to live based on what was sold, and now he's just got to sell himself to you as a slave. Well, here, this is probably what we're looking at. Sorry, Cadaver Splatter, I see your question there. Hang on just a second. Or your statement. Maybe it's a statement. I'll get it in just a second. That's good. Let me not lose this. Nope, lost it. Damn. Sorry. Let me look at what I was reading. You probably have a paterfamilias here, right? So somebody that's gone through these stages of poverty, or going further and further into debt. These mitigating these situations or these actions that the people are supposed to take either didn't work or they didn't do them to help them out. And so now he's gotten to the point where he's had to sell himself and his family, because if he's selling himself and he has a family, his family's going to come with him, according to the text here, which would make sense as the paterfamilias. And it's it's possible that he's he's already sold off his family to the particular person that he's selling them to. But at any rate, here it says in the year of Jubilee that all of them go out, right? So you have some potential distinction there as well. So we've seen a couple of distinctions already between what's seen here in Leviticus 25 and what we've seen in Exodus 21 and Deuteronomy 15. You have a slight distinction with, slight is not the right word, but you have a distinction here. It's no longer serve 6, go out on the 7th. It's now they go out on the year of Jubilee. And you've got them not serving as Eveds. You've got them serving as Sachirs or as Toshavs. And then the family goes out. Now, this probably isn't a contradiction in this respect from Exodus 21, because in Exodus 21, what you're looking at is definitively stated in the text, an individual that is marrying a slave once he has sold himself into debt slavery, and the slave was the master's, the female slave was the master's, and then the children that are the master's because of that. Probably just a completely different scenario here. Nonetheless, there's probably a play on that, at least in the mind of the writer. Okay, let me pause for just a second and go back up. So Cadaver Splatter wrote, in the Sumerian period, was there an elevated position for women's rights as opposed to the time of Hammurabi and after? Thinking back to the laws of Ornamu. I'd have to think about it. I'd have to go back and read the laws of Ornamu again, and think about it in that way. I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know. I have to think about that. It's a good question. Sorry, that probably wasn't terribly helpful. Oh, I see. Praise I am that I am is here. Hey, Praise. Tim Smith. So since Yahweh said not to unwelcome people from other lands, why did they have slaves? Not to unwelcome. Sorry, I'm just trying to understand exactly what you're asking here. If you're asking why they're not I don't know that I understand. So we'll see it here in a second. There's a distinction that's made between fellow Israelites that sell themselves into debt servitude, and I think it's a very intentional, on the part of the writer, distinction that's being made, and I think it's the article that I'm thinking, it's called The Birth of the Lemma. Can't remember who wrote it now, which is really bad. So I should remember that, but I don't. Oh. But I have my iPad here so I can tell you. Sorry, everybody. By the way, if you want to read a book on the difficulties of establishing what it means to be a ger, what it means to be a toshav, what it means to be a nochri, or to be a nechar, all these different words that are used for foreigners, these different types of foreigners. A good book to at least begin with is The Alien in Israelite Law by Christina Van Houten. It's a 1991 volume in JSOT series. If you email me, I can get you the specific reference. But, trying to distinguish, what is the difference between a ger and a toshav and a nochri, a foreign person. It's not easy. And when you see them in, oh God, what do you call it when you have two words side by side that, God, it's on the tip of my tongue. Something and something, two nouns, and they're to modify one another. adjectively. Damn it. I can't remember what it's called. It's like right there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You have those words. Sachir v'toshav is one of them. Is it, is that this word that I can't remember right now? Anyway, I've probably lost everybody. I apologize. I do apologize a lot. Good grief. I was right to put it in that video. Okay, the birth of the lemma. Where are you? It is by Levinson, 2005. Levinson, 2005, the birth of the lemma. So, why did I mention that? Oh, because he's drawing a very clear distinction. He's showing that, he's arguing that the writer of Leviticus 25 is thinking back to Exodus 21 and developing it in such a way that it is now drawing a very clear contrast between the ambiguous foreign slave versus Israelite slave, drawing a very clear distinction, and we'll see where he's arguing that from here in just a couple of minutes as these verses continue. Sorry, are there any questions that have come up? Yami Yamazuki, the alien and Israelite law sounds like something Sitchin would be into. That's true. Right. Verse 41. Is that where we are? Good. Oh, no, I already did 41. Okay. For they are my servants, so ki avadai hem, asher hotzeni, whom I brought out, me'eretz Mitzrayim. So you from the land of Egypt, you will not, they will not be sold in a slave sale. Which again, clear distinction that's being drawn here. Okay. You will not lo tirde, you will not rule over them, beperech here, with severity. This word perech is actually a little. It's not. The word in and of itself is not terribly complicated. The way that it's used in different contexts can be somewhat ambiguous. Here, I think that what the text is trying to get at, that the question has come up when it says here in verse 43, and when you're going to see it again in verse 46, what does it mean to, by the way, if you have questions or comments, you want me to see something, please, please tag me at Digital Hammurabi, because it's hard for me to track here, particularly with 65 people watching. This is fantastic. Thank you all very much for being here. So the word perech, when it's used, the question has come up, well, does it just mean, because when you see it in other context, it means like, hard labor, right? Forced labor. It's sort of like mas in a way. Anyway, never mind. It's a type of forced labor, or it has the idea of forced labor. So you see it in Exodus. The Israelites are treated very harshly, and they're made to work hard under this forced labor. And so here, this is what's being brought up. You're not to treat them with how do they translate, rigor, right? Which is one of the ways that's done it. And so here, I don't think that you'll see why it's a problem here shortly, because it's mentioned again in verse 46, and it seems to be in a context, arguably in a context where it says, don't treat your fellow Israelites with perech, leaving it implicitly that you're going to treat the foreigners that you're going to treat as slaves with perech, right? And so what does it entail? Does it entail this forced labor? Does it entail just keeping them for life and not the forced labor? I think it's probably trying to narrow it down too much to say that it's one or the other. It probably encompasses both, right? This because what does it mean to be an eved? Well, here in Leviticus 25, the writer is going, I think, to great lengths to show you can't treat fellow Israelites as an eved, even though it says there in Exodus 21, in this earlier covenant code that you can do that. I think this is pretty good evidence that the holiness code here in Leviticus 25 comes after, right, and is a development of Exodus 21. And so it's saying, no, you can't just, I'm drawing a distinction between how you treat fellow Israelites and how you treat, the foreigners that you are allowed to take as eveds. You can't treat a fellow Israelite as an eved, but so you can't rule over them b'ferech, with perech. So anyway, let's continue, because I can blather on about that time and again. So, all right. So we've said here you can't, verse 43, rule over them. This term radah, has this idea of ruling, and it can mean ruling harshly, which fits with this context. But you are to fear your God. However, here, as for your male servants and your female servants, whom you will have, who will be to you, from the goyim, we'll talk about that in a second, from the goyim, who are around you. I don't know why I keep highlighting this, like this really helps you guys, sorry. From them you may purchase slaves, or a slave, but probably here in a collective, slaves, and male slaves and female slaves. So, who are the goyim? Goyim is a interesting term there. Here in Leviticus, it tends to take on the idea of like hostile nations, right? It tends to be those nations that are hostile to the nation of Israel. That being said, it's certainly not a given that it's going to be that. And you can go back all throughout Genesis and see how the nations that God would raise up from Abraham are referred to as the Goy. I'll make you a great nation, Goy. So we can look at that. Actually, I think I have that in that video that's coming out. Oh, it does help, Nick J says, to highlight words. And Richard, I'm sorry we make you apologize so often. You guys definitely don't do that. It's just it's just who I am, unfortunately. I'm really sorry about it. Just kidding. Okay, so yes, the goyim here, probably, if I had to take a stance, I would say it probably has the idea of or an understanding of those nations that are hostile. They would be like the nations in Deuteronomy 20 and 21. I'd say that's probably true, but not necessarily, right? So I would want to leave that open to just have it be nations that are around. But I do think it probably does have to do with nations that are not looked favorably upon. So then 45, V'gam ibnei hatoshavim hagarim imachem. This is interesting, right? So, and also from the sons of the inhabitants, from the children of the inhabitants, the sojourners, the toshavim, there's that word again, who are garim, who are dwelling, who are living with you. So now we're talking about another group, right? You have the nations that are around them. You can take slaves from them. And you can take them from the foreigners that are dwelling with you on not a permanent basis. I'll say that. That's probably a fair way to say that. Who are dwelling with you. From them you may purchase or acquire, however you want to take that, from their from their families who are with you, whom they bore in your land. Right? So this is... this is being very specific. These are the ones that are with you. So you get the nations around. You can take from there. Take, I don't think we're implying stealing them. I don't think that's what's going on. I think we're probably talking about, purchasing them. Somebody asked the question last week, if a foreign nation purchased slave Jimmy, let's say, Jim Bob slave, and then they came to an Israelite and said, here, we have a slave for sale in the slave market. We'll sell them in a slave sale which is what the text just said, and you purchase that stolen slave, would that be considered? Would that be considered, purchasing a stolen slave? Or would they do that? Would that be legal? The text doesn't specifically talk about that. I suspect probably not if they knew, but I mean it's difficult for me to speculate on that sort of thing. But the point here is not that they're going and stealing them, because they're definitely not doing that. In my opinion, I can't see a way in the text that would allow them to go steal them. They purchase them, they acquire them in a legal sense, right? So. Okay. And you can bequeath them, right? You will bequeath them. You can bequeath them to your sons after you, to your children after you. So here's this word achuzah, right? And this is that word that becomes complicated. Right? I mean, it's not complicated. It's interesting here because let's think back. How have we seen achuzah in this chapter? We've seen achuzah as property, right? But as landed property. It's been the land that they've been going back to. Supposed to go back to their property, go back to their land, go back to it's that actual, the field. So this is, this is clearly, in its general use, and really almost exclusively, and you can look it up. I can't remember how many times it's used. At least a score of times, I think, in the Old Testament text. But this is landed property, right? So here, I think this is the only place that achuzah is used of people, right? You have an instance in Ezekiel. It's sort of metaphorical. We can talk about that. We talked about it actually a little bit already, where Yahweh is called achuzah. It's a play, of course, on can't remember what chapter. That's bad. I don't remember what chapter, but it's talking about the Levites are not given achuzah, right? They're not given in the same way that landed property as the rest of Israel is, and so in that way, when it says that Yahweh is to be their achuzah, I mean you can see it in the context of Ezekiel, but this is talking about he's going to be that thing that they didn't get, right? But at any rate, here achuzah is being used to talk about property, right? But it's referring to the slaves. So it's very interesting. I think it's actually making a fairly bold statement, calling them that. But notice here that it says that they are achuzah le'olam. And I'll talk about this in an upcoming video just because it's been brought up a little bit. But olam here, it just means into the future with no end in sight, right? That's what this is talking about, the future with no end in sight. This isn't some type of a philosophical use of olam. But here, you can pass them down to your children as inheritance after you, as this inherited property. This is achuzah. Forever. You can either take the forever going with achuzah as, or you can take it as le'olam bahem ta'avodu. Sorry, the accents there. Forever they will serve you. But in either case, it's it's not good. So that's what this is, the juxtaposition that's being placed here. However, insects are cool. I have to go buy Digital Hammurabi and chat. Hey, thank you very much, Insects Were Cool, for coming. It's really it's been a lot of fun. I appreciate it. I see the chat's kind of buzzing. I'm a little afraid to look back through because I feel like I'll get caught up in what's going on. I'm not gonna look. because I'll get caught up in the conversation and then I'll lose my train of thought. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so the juxtaposition is being placed rather clearly here, the fronting here in verse 44 of as for your male and female slaves. And then, of course, the end here, verse 46. But as for your, but with your brethren, as for your brethren, the children of Israel, a man, sorry, the word order is interesting here. A man over his brothers will not rule. A presumptive pronoun over him, bafarech here, but with perech, right? So you can see this phrase. So to rule over with perech is seen here. To rule over with perech, and I can't leave them both highlighted. Sorry, but it's there. And it's there. It's at the beginning and it's at the end of this this break that describes who can be your evadim, right? Hebrew slaves or the Hebrews can't be, right? Israelites can't be. Who can be? The goyim, probably in this case. I mean, it's clear just as the nations around them. If you were to ask the writer, he's probably thinking, well, yeah, they're enemies of ours, probably. That's what I would suspect. But the word goyim doesn't necessitate that. I think it's the context and how it's used by the writer. And I think in Leviticus, I think that's how it's probably being used. But it's not just the goyim, right? It's the toshavim, the ones who are living among you. And so these are the, in some way, temporary residents, be they tenant farmers or sojourners, however you want to take that. You can take them from those individuals and they can be passed down as inheritance. They will become achuzah, their property, along with their children. And, they'll serve you, la'olam, they'll serve you forever. So, this is sort of what's going on here. Sorry. Nick J, should I time out praise? He is getting annoying here and is not helping anyone and is distracting. Yeah, I mean, I can't. Come on, man. Praise. Sorry, I can't look back and see what you're doing. I don't know. Praise, I know you're a mature enough guy, man. Come on. Yeah, I don't know. You guys, I trust you. Use your judgment. I appreciate you asking. I really do. If you guys, if you think that's necessary, I'm behind you. I made you guys mods, so I'm behind you. But I think praise can. Well, like what are you saying here? Praise, goyim are declared enemies of God. Cadaver. Yeah, I think that praise. I think that's probably true here in, but not always, right? But I think it's true here in Leviticus, and there are definitely places where that's true. There's no question. I don't know that. I don't know that makes a difference here in this text. I mean, we see, right, this, we see this sort of thing in Deuteronomy 20 and 21. Okay. I mean, see, the thing is, the goyim are often used to describe, sorry, are there slave jokes? Hey, guys, I don't want slave jokes. That's no good. Sorry, I'm just looking back through. Yeah, oh, well, sorry, Christina said praise is just being arrogant. Yeah, I mean, I don't, that's okay. I mean, people can be arrogant. But you guys know, like, yeah, I definitely don't want praise. Sorry, you said, I'm just responding to people's claims. That's cool. As long as we're all keeping, look, let's be mature here, right? We don't want slave jokes. That's not a, yeah, mods, if you see people doing slave jokes, I want them out. That's not cool. We don't want anything racist in here. That's not what we're here for, right? We're here to learn. I'm here to learn. We're here to learn. So, anyway, right. What was I saying? Yeah, the goyim are often associated in many different circumstances with these nations, right? The Jebusites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the blah blah blahites. As my pastor of mine used to say, the mosquito bites. It's pretty funny. Anyway, nonetheless. So, right. I gotta stop looking at the side chat because, yeah. Yeah, I really gotta stop looking at the side chat. Sorry. Okay, Math Magic Pagan is saying questionable comments, but not really slave jokes. Okay, cool. I trust Math Magic Pagan's judgment on this. Yeah, you know, if you do have a wrench, you know, obviously I trust you guys. I like Hannah's advice here. Try and learn something instead of just defending your religious views. I mean, look, all of us can learn something, right? Every time I come to the text, I learn something. Every time I come to a conversation, I learn something. You know, we can always. Okay, sorry. Math Magic Pagan says, "Go back to the stream." That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so we've seen the juxtaposition here of what I think is a development of Exodus 21, where the writer of the Holiness Code here in Leviticus 25 is being very clear. I think there's a really good case to be made for that. That he's developing this and saying, okay, it's not, you can't make a Hebrew, a fellow Israelite, a slave, and you can't hold him for 6 years in ruling over them as a slave. You have to treat them as a sachir or as a toshav, right? In other words, they're making money. So if we move then on to 47, and then I'll probably stop after 47 to 49 because it sort of moves on to something else. But 47 is another case that's set up. So if the it's an idiom here, like if the ger, this is the ger v'toshav. So this is one of the examples where ger v'toshav is actually, I still can't remember the name of that term, ger v'toshav. What exactly is that? So ger is like a resident alien, not always, but often. So a toshav we've talked about before. What happens when you put them together? It's interesting. Are they two separate terms? This is debated, so you can read all about that in that book by Van Houten. But at any rate, if this individual, the foreigner that is residing among you, you know, becomes well off, right? That's the thing here. Gains, how they say it, gains wealth. It's fine. Obviously, it's fine. It's a good translation. And your brother becomes poor. The brother who is with him becomes poor and is sold to the ger toshav, the resident alien of some sort, who is with you, or to the eked, is like the descendant or whatever, of the family of the ger. So after he is sold. So this is the situation that's being set up here. And this is really important because, and I think we all need to understand this, many foreigners that reside in Israel, I would say probably the majority of foreigners that reside in Israel are not slaves. Right? I mean, they're not slaves. Right? This is something that we need to be very, very clear about. So when you see the resident alien, when you see the ger, we see the toshav, we see the sachir, you know, these individuals, and of course I don't think a sachir is necessitated to be a foreigner, but I have to look at that. But when you see these, the nochri, you have these foreigners in the land or interacting with the land. They're not always slaves. In fact, I would say they're very, statistically speaking, they're probably rarely slaves, right? You know, the nochri, the text says very clearly, if if you're not to exact usury from your fellow Israelite, you can exact it from the foreigner, from the nochri, right? So But the Nochri is, probably somebody. It's possible that this person is somebody who's engaging in like mercantile loans. But nonetheless, this is not somebody. This is probably somebody who's well off. At least it's arguable that that's one position to take. But nonetheless, these foreigners that are there, they're not all slaves, right? Again, I think a small percentage are. And so here you have an example of a foreigner who's residing in the land, a sojourner of some sort, resident, alien, toshav, it's difficult to say specifically. But he becomes so well off that, at the same time, a fellow Israelite, one of your fellow Israelites, becomes so poor that he has to sell himself to this very well off toshav. So if you think about a toshav, if you think about, if it is true that, if you think the toshav is somebody that is like a tenant farmer, somebody that is working land that is owned by, renting out and working land that is owned by an Israelite, if another Israelite becomes so poor that he sells himself to that toshav who would need hired hands, right? What do? Right? What is the law call for you to do? So achrei nimkar, so after he is sold, there must be to him, or there will be to him, a redemption, the right of redemption. One of his brothers will redeem him, right? So this is the point. But I bring this up, I wanted to translate through this and talk about it. This is that word Gaal, the Goel, right? The Redeemer. I wanted to talk about it because we have to know that, number one, not all foreigners that are in the land are slaves. This is a really important thing, and that they can do very, very well in the land, right? I mean, the position, if a toshav is a tenant farmer, then a toshav is there to make money, right? I mean, he's there to do well. So this idea, I bring this up because to argue that any foreigner that comes into Israel is completely beholden to it has no other option, I guess, to say, than to become a servant of an Israelite. It's just not the case, right? You have a lot of mercantile trade that's being done. You have here just this particular tenant farmer, if that indeed is what a toshav is, which I think there are good arguments. Sorry, I happened to just catch Josh finally understands the goyim are enemies of God. Praise, you're a funny guy. You're a funny guy. Yes, I finally understand that. Thanks, boss. I appreciate you enlightening me. Oh God. All right, I'm really gonna stop. I'm gonna take my Magic Pagan's advice and not look at the side chat. Okay. So these foreigners can do very, very well in the land, and it's not they're not beholden to selling themselves as debt slaves or any kind of slaves to the Israelites. And here this is evidence of that, right? I mean, you can see a resident alien among them becomes so well off and is so successful that he's actually able to take as a debt slave an Israelite, right? So, we've got to be really careful here. So, let me say this, and then I'll probably start wrapping this up because I just saw the time and it's been going about 2 hours. And we've come to the end of what I was going to translate here. Look, this stuff is not simple. Let me say it again. This stuff is not simple. If this stuff were simple, people wouldn't be able to write volume after volume after volume, monograph after monograph, article after article, saying new and different and debated things, right? You wouldn't be able to do that because it would be all the same. You'd say, well, yeah, of course we know that. Of course we know that. So, as Skylar and I have said on digital fiction, if you think it's simple, you probably don't understand it. And that's just the reality. So, the reality here in the biblical text is, yes, there is no question that you have debt slavery and you have chattel slavery. That's, I mean, I couldn't find any way around that, right? And the thing is, I don't think there's any need to, because this is a different time, right? And I don't want to get off too much into, I don't want to keep getting off into, like philosophy here, because I'm not a philosopher. But the text, I think, is abundantly clear, particularly here in Leviticus 25. You have the distinction between Israelites who cannot be, according to the law, taken as evadim, right? They have to be treated as hired workers, or as, if you want to say sojourner or tenant farmer, however you want to do that. And then they have to be released at the year of Jubilee, contrasted with these people from the nations around, from the Goyim around them, and from the Toshavim that are living with them, from the sojourners that are in the land, right? So basically what it's saying is, if you have foreigners that are of a particular kind, can't believe I just used the word kind, particularly after watching Prophet of Zod's video on that. Boy, I see a lot of people being timed out. I wish that people would behave in here. Come on, guys. Behave. What was I saying? Okay, right. This is complicated, and you're looking at different covenant. You have a covenant code. You have the Deuteronomistic code. I keep using that term, but it's not really a code, but whatever. The Deuteronomistic laws. You have what we call the covenant code in Exodus, and then you have the holiness code in Leviticus. It's very complicated, and we just gotta be cognizant of the fact that it's complicated, it's difficult, and but it's something that there are certain things that we can say, and there are certain things that I think we can address, and trying to find ways around them. I don't think it's necessary. Whatever position you take, be you an atheist, an agnostic, a Christian, I don't think there's a reason. There's no necessity for you to try to, for anybody to try to, not wish these things away, but explain these things away. Anyway, okay. Well, I'm seeing in the side chat here that we got somebody being kind of a dick, and yeah, that's not cool. All right. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you guys so much for watching and for participating. And I enjoy every bit of this. Not so much here at the end here where we're talking about people getting timed out and people promoting slavery. I just think that's awful. But nonetheless, I appreciate your patience and with me. Kind of going on as I do. So at any rate, thank you all very much for watching. Until next time, resist poor scholarship. Always ask, how do you know that? Thanks, guys.